Hi everyone! So guess what? My sketchbook was stolen last month, and it kind of caused a bit of mayhem in my life. Emotional mayhem, actually. Let me start at the beginning and explain to you what happened. So I went to the zoo with the family, and I always bring my sketchbook. My daughter also brought her sketchbook, and I put it in my backpack, and then we just went off to the zoo. And we really didn't sketch all that much until about 2 or 3 hours in, and we finally got to a place where we were kind of tired by that point, and so we were able to sit down and we started sketching. So we first started sketching the giraffes, and then we went and saw the chimps, so we sketched the chimps, and then afterwards we went and we sketched some elephants. Okay, so when I brought my sketchbook and I brought it out for the first time, I realized that in my sketchbook I had the postcard that I was going to give away to Bill. I had already announced who won it, and I had put it in an envelope, and I had put it in my, well, I hadn't put it in an envelope, but I just had put it in my sketchbook along with the sheet of thumbnails with the marker thumbnails that I did, the color roughs. And I had accidentally left it in my sketchbook, and the reason I had brought it was so I could take it home to show my daughter, who likes to draw. And I just wanted to show her what I'd done. And then on that Monday, when I went back to work, I was going to put it in the mail and send it to Bill. Well, so my daughter and I were sketching, and like I said, the last thing that we did were the elephants, and I was kind of teaching my daughter a little bit about sketching animals, and she had a little bit of a breakthrough, and it was really nice, and it was very cool, and I had just finished sketching an elephant face, because I really liked this jaw thing that they were doing, and I was really trying to capture it, and it was really fun. And I set my sketchbook down on the fence, and I went and reached to my backpack and got a piece of, I got water, and I took a drink because I was thirsty. And then when I put the water back, everybody was ready to go, so I walked away. And I left my sketchbook on the fence. So we walked maybe a few yards away. We probably walked about for 5 minutes, and we ended up by the bathrooms, and then all my kids needed to go to the bathroom, so I took them all to the bathroom, at least all the boys, and we got out, and I noticed my daughter had her drawing pad. She didn't have a sketchbook. Her sketchbook's full. Excuse me. So she just had a clipboard with paper on it, and I saw it, and I'm like, oh, my sketchbook. And I'm like, did I leave it in my backpack? Did I put it in? I don't think I put it right back in my backpack. Oh, crud. So the first thing I did was look in my backpack. It was not there. By this point, 30 minutes had passed, about 20 or 30 minutes. And my heart sank. So I ran back, and there was a family there staring at the elephants. And I said, hey, I went to where I left my sketchbook, and it wasn't there, and I asked the people there if they had seen it, and they said no. And I believed them, because they felt bad for me. They looked like oh crud, I'm sorry, you know, like, so they hadn't seen it. So that meant that within the time that I had left it, within the 20-30 minutes that I had left it, somebody just picked up and took it. And that wouldn't have been a big deal. Somebody picking up and taking it is not stealing. It's just, oh, I found this, right? So I thought, and I immediately, it ruined my day. I had, and by the way, 6 of the pages in that sketchbook out of the 10 pages that I had already drawn on had been scanned and actually sent to you guys as rewards last month. So 6 of those pages are at least scanned. So I have a backup copy of the first 6, which include the first page of my daughter blowing bubbles. I drew my daughter blowing bubbles, and I drew my kids at the beach, and that was just like memory trigger, you know, and it was like a memento, right? So emotionally, just that page alone was a big deal. However, like I said, I had scanned it. I have a copy of it. It still exists in a digital format. I could print it out and put it back in the sketch, whatever. But at least I have a backup. But there are 4 pages that I didn't back up that I didn't even take photos of. Usually I take photos of some of my sketches for Instagram, but I hadn't even taken a picture of those drawings at all. And those were paintings, like two pages of those were paintings, watercolor paintings. One was the one underneath, like if you remember last month, there was a painting of a blonde woman in watercolor, and if you remember, it was a page, and she was up on the corner, and then on the bottom I had drawn another painting, and it was a terrible painting. It was one that I had done of Supergirl, and I was going to share my complete and utter failure at that painting, and that was one of the paintings. And then on the other page, in the other pages, I had done other paintings, and one of them was a breakthrough painting that actually worked. And then after that, I tried another painting, and that one worked also. And I had a couple of sketches that were kind of, it was a bit of a fail. I had actually put a Post-it on it to try to fix it. And then of course the zoo drawings. So I think overall there were, like I said, 1, 2, 3, about 4 pages. There was 4 pages that I hadn't scanned. I hadn't had the copies of. And remember what I said? The postcard, the Chun-Li postcard, was in there with the thumbnail color comps. It was in there. It was in my sketchbook. And I had 4 sheets of Wonder Woman stamps that I was using. That's about $40 worth of stamps, and that's what I used to mail the postcards off. I would get a Wonder Woman stamp, and I would put it on there, and I love those Wonder Woman stamps. Now I have to replace them. I ended up getting Scooby-Doo ones, which aren't as cool. It's not as cool because I like Wonder Woman. Anyway, so it was a huge deal. It ruined the rest of the trip. However, there was still hope, because as you exit the zoo, near the front gate, there is a lost and found mail slot, like a slot. And when you find something, you slip it in the slot. And, you know, so I knew that there was a lost and found, and a good-hearted person who found my sketchbook will go out of their way to put that sketchbook in the slot, not keep it. And by the way, I made the mistake of not putting my information in the sketchbook. That was another huge problem, right? But again, you know, an honest person would go put it in lost and found. So there was still hope in the back of my mind. I was trying to still be happy, but it was like, it felt like my dog died. It felt like my dog died. I knew that if it was not recovered, I would never see those paintings again, and I would never see that Chun-Li. I would have to redo the Chun-Li postcard, and there's nothing worse than having to redo something that you already finished, that you were done with, that it was over. So we spent really we spent another hour wandering around the zoo, but at that point I was just kind of like zombie. I was a zombie. Emotionally, I just couldn't get into the trip anymore. So I ended up going to the Lost and Found when the time was up when we finally were ready to go home. And I looked, and there was a number to call to see if anybody found the thing. So I took a picture of the phone number, and then, but it also said go to window 11 for the lost and found. So I go to window 11. As soon as we leave the zoo, I go straight to window 11, and I'm knocking on the window because there was nobody, because you know they were closing down. And the guy comes out, and then he said, "Hey," and I said, "Hey, have you seen a sketchbook? It had this, this, and this, and it had these stickers on the cover." No, I haven't seen anything like it. So the person who found my sketchbook kept it. Just straight up kept it. Didn't even seem to have bothered turning it in. He just took it. Just plain old stole it. I still had hope though, so I waited an entire day. The next day, I waited a whole day, and on Tuesday, the next day, on Tuesday I ended up calling, and I left a message. So I left a message twice. They hadn't found the sketchbook. They didn't call me back for it, so that means that yeah, whoever took it stole it. He just straight up took it. Didn't even bother to look to see if there was a lost and found. Didn't even, I mean, my name was on this postcard. They could have Googled me. They haven't been contacted. They just took it. So, and I think I had information in there about a class I did for some teenagers at the local library, and I think my name was on it and my address. So I think that sheet may have had my information. So yeah, there was no excuse. Like those people just, whoever took it just took it. I was really upset. Like it really did. It just ruined my week. I felt like my dog died. It was I felt so bad. I'm still like upset about it. Like I'm still like kind of choked up, angry. So what I ended up doing was I realized that I needed to replace my sketchbook, and because I had been doing watercolor paintings recently, the sketchbook search, it began this thing about what makes a good sketchbook. How do I pick a good sketchbook? Like I've never really thought about this. I just grabbed, hey, this is fine, and then I picked it up, and it kind of led to this whole, what's the best sketchbook for watercolor? What's the best sketchbook to carry around? How do you use a sketchbook? I even asked my personal mentor, Paul. I asked him, hey, I noticed that you have a tiny sketchbook and it's not spiral bound, because my preference for sketchbooks is spiral bound, because you can just flip it around and then you have the smallest amount of real estate, like smallest amount of real estate, because I like big 11 by 9. What is it? 12 by 9? 12 by 9 sketchbooks, I think, something around like that. So they're yay big. I had a big one that was just too big. I had the small ones that were just too small. Like the other ones were just the right size. You can carry it. It's big. I don't know. There was something about that sketchbook, but I noticed that a lot of the people that I'm around, a lot of my friends, and a lot of artists that I see, they always carry small sketchbooks, and I didn't understand why. I didn't understand why they had perfect bound sketchbooks as well. So I asked, and I watched some videos on sketchbooks. I watched some videos talking about the types of sketchbooks, the size of sketchbooks, the format of the sketchbooks, the papers of the sketchbooks, and I was really just interested in just trying to figure out how to replace my sketchbook. So what I ended up doing is I ended up replacing my sketchbook with not one other sketchbook, but with 3. And to me, the criteria was still spiral bound at first, but then I thought I'd try out the perfect bound. So the sketchbooks that I ended up buying here, let me show you my sketchbooks. So the first thing that I knew I needed was I needed a sketchbook that I could do watercolor in that the paper wouldn't buckle. Now that said, the sketchbook that I actually had, which was like this. This is an old sketchbook, but it looks like this. This is it's a Canson, and it's got this spiral, and so it holds water, color, and marker. It does a good job with watercolor and marker. It's not a bad sketchbook. It holds the water pretty good. It's multimedia. So, but I was gonna do some heavy-duty watercolor paintings on my sketchbook. So, and this is kind of similar to the other sketchbook that I had stickers on it too, like this. So I needed something like that, but with heavier paper that could withstand getting wet. So I went down to Carter Sexton, which is a very fancy, tiny art store in North Hollywood, and I hadn't been there for years. Actually, our studio was around the corner originally from that place before we moved, and so I ended up picking up this sketchbook here. I'd never seen it before, but it says Bristol and vellum, and it's got really heavy, very thick paper. And what I liked about it was, first, it was spiral bound. Second, I thought the paper was really great. And third, it's got this really cool type of thing where you can actually literally pull the paper out and then put it back in, which is kind of cool. The thing that I absolutely despised and hated about this paper, this sketchbook, is this cover. It is just a cardboard cover. I treat my sketchbooks like garbage, like they get so much abuse because I carry them around everywhere. They just get destroyed. So without a hardcover, this is ridiculous, right? This is the dumbest. I can't carry this thing around with this flimsy garbage cover. So what I ended up doing was I went to Hobby Lobby. I ended up getting chipboard, a big gigantic sheet of chipboard, which was actually for a framing board. And I cut it to size, and I punched holes in it, which was a whole ordeal in and of itself. Finding a hole punch that can go through a chipboard was a pain in the neck. It took me like a few days and I ended up ordering it. I traveled to all kinds of places trying to find one. And so now, and then I put it on the sketchbook. So now it's got a nice hard cover that I can, so now I did the cover myself. So here's my sketchbook, and then eventually maybe I could even paint on this. The other sketchbook that I bought that exact same day was a tiny sketchbook like this, and I did the exact same thing. I had a flimsy, crappy green cover, but I gave it my own cover. And the interesting thing about this is that it's tan paper. But the problem with this tan paper is that it's really thin. It's extremely thin. So I didn't think that I could do watercolor in it. And really, if I wanted to do watercolor, apparently there's the same size of board, same type of sketchbook, but it's not in the sketchbook thing. It's in the scrapbooking. It's a photo album sketchbook. It used to be a sketchbook, but then the brand, the people who made it, instead would sell it as a photo album, as a scrapbook, and it has hard stock brown paper. So I still have to go. I'm gonna go look for one, but for now I'm gonna use this, and I will show you some of the drawings in here later. And finally, and both of these are spiral bound. Now I have done some paintings on both, and I'm gonna talk a little bit about sketchbook size in a second, and then finally I have this one. And this is a perfect bound sketchbook. It's watercolor paper. It's actually got the rough type of cottony type watercolor paper. It's supposed to lay flat. I have not used it yet, but it's supposed to lay flat. So this is completely empty. I have yet to test it out, but the paper seems right, and I think from now on, no matter what, I am going to be using watercolor paper, even if I'm just doing regular drawings, and just because of the quality that I could use, because otherwise, I mean, multimedia has served me fine for years and years, but now that I'm painting, thicker stock paper. This is it's just called Handbook. I don't know why. I don't know what the. I got it on Amazon. Okay, and I'll probably link to all the sketchbooks I got if you wanna take a look at them, and if you want your own version. Okay, so field sketching and painting and drawing. So I noticed that I'm so used to large sketchbooks that when I sit down and do anything outside, I sit down and I'm going to paint. And so what I do is I have my little paint thing, and I open up my sketchbook. And I'm going to paint something, so I get my paint thing. I have a little fancy schmancy little paint thing, and I set it down on the sketchbook itself, or I have it on my hand. And then I'm usually drawing something from my phone. I have some photos that I'm going to be painting from, and I put my phone on the sketchbook, like lay it on my phone on the sketchbook like this, and then I paint. And that's what I'm used to doing. But the problem is, but with these little ones, I open it up and I try to do the same, and I have no place to put my phone. I'm carrying the paint, my paints on one hand like this. I have the paints on my hand, but I need the phone like propped, and I just don't. I can't do it. Like I don't know where to put the phone. I put the paint somewhere, but I could put the paint somewhere out of the way, like on my lap or whatever. But I need the phone, and like I said, with a big sketchbook, I put it on the sketchbook. But with a small sketchbook, I don't have the room. I don't. So that's the one flaw. Like if I was just drawing what I see most of the time in field sketching, it wouldn't be a big deal. But I usually am drawing something from my phone because I don't. I need I'm usually. Well, I'm going to show you my paintings in a second. So yeah, small sketchbook so far. So I'm thinking that maybe this might be better because it's got two sides, so I could be painting on one side and put my phone on the other, and that maybe that'll be the way to do it. And it's small. So part of the reason why the so the spiral bound, what I liked is the fact that it's a small thing. So you just flip it over and it's just really tiny, and you got very small real estate. Same thing with this. This is as big as it's going to get. It doesn't get wider. If I had a spot, I'm not drawing with a sketchbook wide like this, and it's really unwieldy. But when you do it like this, it's very manageable. While with this, I think I guess it's okay because you could draw like this, and it's kind of similar to the other one, or you could draw like this, and it's still not a lot of real estate. So I'm gonna give this a try, but I haven't yet. Okay, so let's talk about the artwork and the paintings and things like that. So, like I said, 4 pages of art gone. So I can't even share it with you, because I didn't scan it, I didn't take any pictures of it. It's gone. So this is what's left over. And in this month, I did a lot of painting, a lot of practice, a lot of learning. It was a huge learning month for me. I just learned so much. It was just, there's so much in my head right now, and I'm dying to go back and just sketch and draw and keep applying what I've learned. So I'm going to share with you that right now, what I've been doing and what I've learned and how I learned it and all this other stuff. It's just it's going to be, I'm sorry, it's going to be a really long video because of all this stuff that I'm talking about, but I think it's important, and maybe what I should do is do these videos, these blog videos, like these conversations over me drawing something. So from now on, I'm probably going to end up doing that. But so let's begin. So this month, here's what happened. At the beginning of the month, I had to redo this Chun-Li postcard. Like, I had to redo it, like, from scratch. No, well, I had to do the physical version again. I didn't have to do the digital part, but I had to redo the physical. So here I am updating the physical. I'm updating the drawing because in the first version I had forgotten to put Chun-Li's bracelets. So if you notice in last month's Chun-Li drawing, she didn't have her bracelets. So and it bothered the heck out of me, but I was like, oh well, I'm not going to redo the entire thing just because I forgot the bracelets. Well, since I had to redo the entire thing anyway, might as well put the bracelets in, right? So I went back into the digital drawing and I put in the bracelets, and then I reprinted it out, and then I started recoloring it and re-inking, hand inking the final version. So right here, so here we see this version, and then I did fortunately I had a scan of the thumbnail color comps that I had done for the Chun-Li, and it's not as bright or vibrant as the original. I tried to adjust the levels to try to match how vibrant they were, but still it didn't quite match it. But still, I still had at least had a backup copy of what that was. So I had that, and I used this again to do the final. And so I did it. I did the final again. So this is the second version of the postcard. Here's a photo of it. The photos give a little bit of a different impression than the scan, so I just thought I'd include the photo here. This is a better version, so at the end of the day, it turned out better. Also, I did an experiment when doing this because I had already done this. I had already experienced this. I already knew what it was to do this drawing. I decided to do something a little bit different this time around. And what I usually do, here's the scanned version, so you can see that this color's a little bit more vibrant because I adjusted them to try to match the actual postcard itself. What I tried to do this time around was I tried to put the color first and then just do one pass of inking. If you've seen me do a postcard, actually you haven't. I haven't. In the next couple of videos, you're going to see the color comp process, and you're going to see the inking process of that using the Laura Croft postcard that I did a couple of months back. But so what I tend to do is I do a very, very thin outline of the line work that I'm going to ink, and then I do a color pass, and then I do a final thick and thin fancy ink line on top of that. So I thought, well, why do I have to ink twice? Why don't I just start coloring the very light blue line that I have there and then ink it at the end? Well, it turns out that there's a good reason to do a thin line around, and that is by the time I got to the hair here, where it started getting really, really dark, I couldn't even see the light blue line that I was supposed to ink. I couldn't see it. It was completely gone. Like, I'm like, oh crud, like, oh. So there was a moment of panic when I started to go, when I realized I had lost all the line work. But it turned out okay because I had this line version of the Chun-Li drawing, and I pretty much knew based off of these colors what I was supposed to do. So So the inking turned out okay, and everything turned out okay. But and then I had to go in and really quickly actually put in all a thin version of the line work, and then I inked it, and then I colored it, finished coloring it, and then I inked it again. So it was a different experience doing this than it was doing the first one. So it didn't feel like I was just repeating myself. It didn't. I wasn't bored. There was still some energy, and there was still some learning experience. There was still some learning going on. A part of the thing that makes drawing fun and interesting is that there's a little bit of a learning thing happening, and that is really satisfying when you finish drawing. Okay, so that is this new postcard, and I sent it to Bill, and he actually received it. So, oh, thank goodness, because I had a moment of panic again when I put the thing in there, and I remember mailing off the postcard, but I didn't remember putting a piece of tape on the envelope, because the envelopes I use have their own stickiness on it, but it's really crummy, so I always have to put some tape on it just to make sure that it stays closed. And I didn't remember if I had put the tape, and I was afraid that it would slip out in the mail, and I didn't want to read. It was just, what a nightmare. So I'm so glad that Bill told me that he got it. So then I've been doing a lot of painting. So one of the things that I did in figure drawing was I started going back to my brush pen. I have two brush pens. I have a black brush pen. I have a brush pen that does gray, and in the light lines are a ballpoint pen. So I went into figure drawing and I started drawing a really quick lay-in with my ballpoint pen. Then I went in and I started doing the graphic lines with my gray brush pen, and then I started doing some final lines with my black brush pen. And that's what I ended up doing in figure drawing here in this day. And I continue to do it in the following session with a different model. So that's what these are: black brush pen and ballpoint pen. So one of the things that I discovered when I was doing my watercolor sketching on paper was that and the most successful one, I would approach it as if it was a figure drawing, but I would approach it as a figure drawing as if it was in color. And what I realized was I started using, I did something very scary for me. I took out a water brush and I started using the water brush. And to me, the water brush was very scary. I didn't think that I would be able to control it. Turns out that when I put the pigment on the water brush, it reacted and acted like a brush pen, and I am so comfortable with brush pens that and as you can see, I did figure drawing with the brush pen, so I'm so comfortable with brush pen, and it felt so much like a brush pen. It felt like I was inking rather than just simply painting, that I instantly felt comfortable. And because it happened the way it did, I had some painting breakthroughs, and I would show you the first painting that I did that was a breakthrough, but it's gone because I was in the other sketchbook. However, I did duplicate it in this new sketchbook. So let me show you. And this was the very first painting I did in any of the, no, that's not true. It's not the first painting I did in any of the sketchbooks, but it was the first one that I finished. So let's start with the one that I finished first. So I did this on my sketchbook. So this was the third painting that I've ever done in watercolor that was in any way, shape, or form successful. And this is a copy of the first one. Now the first one I did on white paper. This is done on tan paper, and so redoing it on tan paper was a completely different experience. So I didn't mind redoing this painting, and it came out almost exactly the same, except actually I did this better because the first version that I did, the one on white paper, had this weird thing in this eye that was just too black. It was just weird. It was like a bit of a stain, and it didn't quite, and it stuck out to me. But this version was done with watercolor and a little bit of gouache, so white gouache to make these whites pop out here. And same with here. This is the first time I ever done any white gouache painting here on with the watercolor. So this was the very first time I've ever done anything like it, and I'm very happy with the way it turned out. So this is the only thing. And I've even got this little sketch for the next one, but I didn't scan it because it's not even done. It's just kind of there. So that's what I did here in this one. And then for the other sketches that I did from this one, so I did these paintings here. So and here's my little testing, like what color is this, and the water, the paper is really holds up really well here. And I'm surprised that that's the tan paper with as thin a paper as it did hold up. I will say that once I got to this point, I was really putting a lot of water right here on this area here, and then suddenly all the fibers of the paper started coming up, and eventually I could just rub them off when it dried, and they came off. But the paper started falling apart. Not the case with this paper. It's nice and solid. And so I did these off of you know, photos, and I you know, made them cartoony. But the entire point for me, the exercise was not to capture a likeness so much as to capture, to use it as a bouncing off point to make a cartoony face, a pretty girl in a cartoony style, a slightly more cartoony style, like something that I would do. So having done these sketches, then when I went to figure drawing, I had watched this really interesting video that I'll probably link to, that the exercise was that it was a watercolor teacher, and what he had done was he had traced a photo with just the graphics of the face for his students, so that all they had to do was paint and not have to worry about drawing. And what he ended up doing, what it was they were supposed to paint this black and white in color. So there was a black and white photograph, and then he painted in color. And the entire exercise was to show you that color doesn't matter, only value matters. And you could use any kind of random paint, any kind of random color, and as long as the values were matching the black and white photograph, it would look fine. And so he did this demo, and it's fantastic, and it works great, and it looks fantastic. So I was like, hey, colors don't matter, only the values matter. I'm going to experiment with that. And so I went to, so the next week when I went to figure drawing, I couldn't wait to go to figure drawing just to test this theory out. And so this is what I ended up doing. I ended up doing exactly the same thing as I did with the brush pen, the ink brush pens. But what I ended up doing was I used my water brush, and I brought in my watercolors, and all I did was just randomly pick colors of the correct values and use them for figure drawing. So anything that I would usually do with these shadow shapes, I did with the watercolor instead. And so this is what happened, and they worked. They look really pretty, and the values were, I mean, it worked. Look, the colors don't matter. It's still, what matters is the values, and I thought that was fascinating. The next week, this was 2 weeks worth of figure drawing paintings, and then after I did those experiments, I did this, which is newsprint with a Ritmo charcoal pencil. I hadn't done that in a while, but again, it's the exact same principle, doing the lay-in, capturing the lights and darks. And I hadn't done charcoal pencil drawings in a while, and it was really helpful because in fact, the charcoal pencils are good painting tools, and it helps me paint better. So it's just more practice for my watercolor paintings is doing these things with charcoal, which is kind of a strange thing to do. All right, so next up we've got Kiki. So these are everybody voted for Kiki for the postcard, and I had a heck of a time. It was I thought that was going to be a really easy thing. Drawing Kiki was so much fun, and I drew her really fairly quickly, and then I ended up trying to color her, and had the hardest time trying to get her clothes right, her little dress right, and it was such a pain. I didn't know what to do. It was just so this is the first time that I've actually had to print out 2 sheets just to try to figure out what the heck to do with a marker sketch, how to color it. I eventually figured it out. It was a big, interesting learning experience just to figure this out. I ended up doing this thing where I had this cool grays, and then it goes to neutral grays, and it goes back to cool grays because I didn't have enough cool grays. And then I said, what would happen if I was to paint, to add some blue markers on it? So there was like 3 or 4 blue markers that I used on top of this cool grays, and it gave me this very grayish blue, which I really ended up liking, and this is kind of what I wanted, because otherwise it would look like this, really way too bright. And so here's the final. Here's what it looks like. Here's the photograph of what it looks like. So they're a little bit different. This is a little bit. I did some of the color adjusting so you could see the colors, but you can see that the scan just doesn't quite capture all the colors. Look how subtle these colors are compared to the scan. So, but this is the Kiki. And I might as well tell you who won this postcard, and it is Benny. Gideon, you won the postcard for this month. So I'll just ask you for an address to send it to, and it is yours. Congratulations. Sorry everybody for not. I mean, you guys really voted for Kiki. It's an overwhelming amount of votes for Kiki. It was so much fun that I ended up watching the movie a few days ago with my daughter, who hadn't seen it since she was tiny, and so she loved it. Okay, so the next part of the adventure of my drawing experiences and all the learning that I did, I've been trying really hard, as you can see, to increase my ability to paint. And so one of the things that has bothered me quite a bit is my current paintings, the way that I'm currently painting. It takes forever for me to do a painting, and it is because of the process that I use. And the process is usually a rough drawing, another rough drawing, yet another rough drawing, then an ink, then I do a selection of the entire drawing after I do the final ink line, and then I do a shadow layer, and then I do a form shadow layer, and then I may or may not do a light layer of lights. Right now it's still in black and white, and then I add the a color layer on top of that makes everything kind of in color already. So like I have got the shadows and then the form shadows, and then I do a local color for everything, so then suddenly we get like it's already coming together. And then I go in and do the form shadows. I go in and paint the form shadows so that they're more colorful, more vibrant, and then they work better. And then on top of that, and I do this in each individual area, and then after I do that, I do a light color layer, and I do a rendering layer, like just really render it and make it look painted. And then I go in and I hand color all the ink line so that it matches the rendering, so that you can't see that there's lines in it. And by the time I'm done, it takes forever, right? And so what I was thinking of doing was I'm like, how can I just compress most of this stuff? How can I just, what do people do to compress this so that the reason I broke it up into these tiny steps is so that I could understand all of the holistic things that you have to think about. Tiny little steps help me understand what I'm doing, but what it is, in the same way that when you're drawing, you're thinking about anatomy, construction, rhythm, gesture, all these things all at once, and you're juggling all these things. But when you're learning to draw, you want to do them all one by one, so you can have little steps, mini steps. But then at some point, you kind of converge and combine these things in your head so that you're all kind of doing it all at once. You're juggling it, and it's really what makes a complicated drawing well complicated. The more you practice it, the more you're able to juggle. Well, the same thing with painting. You're doing all these things. You're thinking about value. You're thinking about form. You're thinking about what's the midtones. You're thinking about what the direct light is doing, what the ambient light is doing, what the form shadows look like, what temperature you're doing, what hue you're doing, what's the values that you're handling. You're doing all these things, and then at the same time you're thinking about subsurface scattering, and you're thinking about, well, what's going on over here in this color, and how would it turn into. So you're doing all these things, and I've been doing it in tiny steps so I could wrap my head around it, but it's really slow that way. So I was trying to speed things up. Like, how can I skip things up? How can I just paint over a rough and then just start painting the rough and just skip the final line step? And can I just go straight to the midtone, to the color, without having to do the black and white and mid? So it was just like I was just experimenting, and it's kind of what I did with the watercolor. And the watercolor actually showed me that I could do that. So I tried to start doing it with digital, and on top of that I was experimenting with textures, and there was just so much. So here is the reason I'm setting this up, is to show you this. So I started experimenting, and everybody who is a silver patron is going to get the PSD files, and you're going to see on my PSD file that there is a list of steps that I took, and it's a different set of steps that I just said, which is about 20 steps. not really, it's about 10 or so, but these steps are completely different steps than the ones that I just said, because I was experimenting with a new form, a new type of approach. And there's it was too much for my brain to juggle. So a lot of this is a complete disaster and a complete failure. So I'm going to show you these complete disaster and complete failures, and you're going to get them for yourself, so you can laugh at me. But you can, so you can see that this is one of the experiments. It's okay, but it wasn't. I don't know, it went out of control. I had no control over this. I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I didn't even know what to do with it once it got to this point. So I left it here, and I said, it's an art piece. It's just gonna, oh, look at. So, and then I did this, and actually put this one on Instagram, because this is the beginning of a painting. This is kind of like the graphic shapes that you put down before you even start. So this was my attempt again to try to, like, maybe if it's similar to essentially it's me doing the figure this figure drawing thing, but with this, you know. So digital, and part of the problem was my brush. I couldn't control it. But it was also just my lack of understanding what I wanted to do. And again, I was trying to not capture a likeness. I was just trying to make a cartoony version, just kind of bouncing off one. And so if this didn't turn out bad, I kind of like it. It's kind of an interesting thing. But again, it was an experiment. And then I completely blew it. And so here's another sketch, and it was just a disaster. It just looks like, I don't know what I'm doing. It's an ugly, blotchy, it's just a mess. It's not working. It didn't turn out anywhere near like anything. It doesn't look like anything. It was a disaster. And then I did this one, which I did, if you look at the PSD file of this one, bronze patrons, you get this one. But there is 6 versions of this. And each one is more monstrous than the last. This is the least monstrous out of all the versions. So if you're a silver patron, you're going to get to see all the monsters that I drew. This is just weird, and it's got some elements that are interesting, but it's just weird. It's ugly. So, just moving on to this, which, again, not, you know, so it just wasn't what, yeah. You see what I'm saying? Like I hadn't quite gotten the hang of it. And again, she kind of looks a little bit of a monster. I haven't quite gotten the caricature. She's not cartoony. She's, I don't know. So, and then after this, I tried again, and I said, you know, and here's the thing. The next one I'm going to show you, with this one, I decided, you know what? I'm going to throw out doing the process that I had listed on the file there. And I'm going to do half of the process, but I'm going to do it my way, the way I know how to do something, but without doing all the steps. And so it was a bit of a hodgepodge of everything that I've been learning all this time. I used what I learned in watercolor. I used what I learned doing different digital painting techniques, and I kind of just combined them, fused them together, and I came up with my own way of doing it, and it was way faster. I did this in about 2 hours. In the morning I started it, and by lunchtime it was done. It turned out okay. It turned out okay. And I have done more since, but that will be for next month. But it worked. I was very happy. This was like kind of where I wanted to go. It's working. So, whew, you know, like I finally got through, and I did the learning curve. Like, and so I'm still learning. I'm still right now. I'm doing a painting that's a bit of a disaster, but the method that I'm using is much more malleable, so that if I screw up, I could keep going back and then refixing and adjusting and making adjustments. And I don't commit to a final until it's working in the most roughest kind of stage. So the method that I'm using is actually working way better than the one that I used before. And if I could get more results like this, I'm going to keep doing it. And the last thing will be scans of my sketchbook. This is a direct scan of that sketchbook page, so you're going to have a high-res version of that sketchbook page. However, this is not a scan. This is actually a photo. The reason why is because when I scanned it, it lost the colors completely. The scan just completely, all the subtlety of color was gone. So instead, I just took as good a photo as I possibly could. I'm sorry, there's a little bit of a gradient gray tone coming up here. Next time I'm going to see if I can't, maybe I'll take yet another photo later. But next time I'm going to use a light box like photography light box, not the drawing light box, but a photography light box, which is a box with two white walls, so that any bounce light is white. And so you don't get this kind of bounce light coming from, I had this on a chair, and it was a black chair, so the bounce light came up and it tinted this side of the sketchbook. So I may give it another shot within the light box too, and I'll send it maybe next month. But that is the final. So that's the story for this month. It was a heck of a crazy learning experience. Oh, and by the way, here is the final Kiki postcard. I should actually show you the final physical postcard here. This is what it looks like. This is going to go to Gideon. And these are the envelopes that I put them in. This is the one that, see, it comes with these sticky things, but I have to still put tape on it. So it's pretty much ready to go, be sent to Gideon. Okay, so that's that's my story. That's what I've got. That's what I've done this month. It's been a lot of emotional ups and downs. It's been a lot of drama, but I feel like I'm making a lot of progress on my painting, and I'm very, very excited. And whatever I learn, I pass on to you. Okay, so thank you so much for being my patrons, guys. Thank you, Aaron, and Ahobo, Anastasia, Bill Fisher, Bill Moonier, Beanie, Brooke Brown, Chanel, Waja, Eric Preston, Eric Salham, Gala Viking, George Crawford, Heather, Ingrid, Kent, Hoyt the Sheep, Crunch, Lynn, Madeline, Mary, Charlie, Michael Rosemazin. Thank you, Michael. Nathan, Rain, Shopping for Noobs, Sterling A. Brooks, Steve Howard, Steve R. Tamara M. Cotton, Tim, Ulf Meyer, welcome. You, William, and Young Stormlord. Thank you guys for being my patron, for being my patrons, and one more time, Bill Munier, thank you so much for signing up for Patreon this month. So I'm really, really grateful to all of you. You guys are helping and supporting me and making me feel like I'm doing something positive and informative, and I really appreciate it. And I will see you next time. All right, bye.